Are granny squares repetitive? Yes, but is that a bad thing? I don't think so. When you are making granny squares, you are able to practice the same stitch over and over again in whatever granny square pattern you are using. And you're also able to practice your tension making multiple granny squares. So that's why I feel granny squares are great, because as we know, practice makes progress. So in this video, I'm going to show two easy beginner-friendly ways I like to join my granny squares together, by using a slip stitch method and then also a mattress stitch method. Now there are many other ways that you can join your granny squares together, but these two stitches will give you 3 different looks for your projects, and they're kind of my quick go-to ones I like to use. Don't forget to hit that like and follow button for more free crochet and knitting machine tutorials. So to get going, you're going to need at least 2 granny squares, your crochet hook, as well as yarn to join them together. If you would like a how-to tutorial on how to make these classic granny squares I'm showing here, I will have the links to them in the video description below that you can tap on, and I show step-by-step how to make them. So to join your granny squares, you're going to take both of them and you want to put front sides facing together. So you're looking at the back side of both of your granny squares, or the wrong side. Then take your yarn and you want to create a slip knot. To know you have done your slip knot correctly, when you pull on the working end of your yarn, you can either tighten or loosen your loop. Next, we line up the granny squares at the corners. For the classic granny square, there are 2 chains right at the corner, right here, on both of them. So we line them up, and then on the edge, you see the stitch, which looks like a V. So this outer stitch is what we're wanting to pick up, not the inner. It's this outer one. So we insert our crochet hook from the back side to the middle of the V, and then on the second granny square we have the same V stitch here of the chain, and we want to insert it in the middle to pick up the outer stitch of the second granny square. So we pick up both outer stitches and we have 3 loops on our hook. We yarn over, and to do a slip stitch we want to pull through all 3 loops. Now let's do our second one. Again, we want to pick up the outer stitch of both granny squares. So it's the stitch closest to you and then the stitch furthest away from you. Yarn over and then pull through all 3 loops. And you want to continue this stitch by stitch all the way down the length of your granny square. So the outer stitch here and then the outer stitch here. Yarn over, pull through all 3 loops that are on your hook. So once you have done that, this is what it's going to look like on the outside of your project. Now you may wonder, what will it look like if you pick up the inner loops? So I will show that. So here is again the corner of our granny square. If you pick up the 2 inside stitches of the chain, and we're going to slip stitch them together. And I'm going to do this down about half of it, picking up the inner stitches, and then I'm going to do the second half, picking up the outer stitches, and I will show you what that looks like. So I'm going to fast forward here real quick. And once I get to the end, so the first half I did doing the inner loops, and then the second half doing the outer loops. And you can't tell much of a difference from the back side where we did the slip stitches, but I'll zoom out here. Here's what it looks like on the inside, doing the slip stitches all the way down. But when we flip it over, here's the difference. Here's doing the outer loops, and you can see how the stitches come together really nicely. Here's doing the inner loops, and it just doesn't have quite as nice of a look. So if you join your granny squares and they kind of look like the first half of the granny square and not the second half, it's probably because of the loop you are picking up on one or both of the granny squares. The other option is if you would rather have this ridge on the outside of your granny square. So here's an example of my purse that I did, and I did the wrong side facing together and did a slip stitch on here, so I have the ridge on the outside of my purse instead of the inside. So it also depends on which way you face your granny squares when you join them together, if you want that ridge on the inside or on the outside of the project. Lastly, let's do a mattress stitch. For a mattress stitch, you need a needle. You can use a large eye needle, either metal or plastic. And usually you want the same color yarn as your project, but I'm going to use a pink yarn so you can see it a little bit easier how to do the mattress stitch. So again, you have the corner of your granny squares, and you have the 2 chains in the corner for a classic granny square pattern. I have the granny squares right side facing up, and then I flip it over and I'm going to insert my yarn into this chain here. And just like when doing the single crochet or the slip stitch, you want to pick up the lower stitch of the chain. So you have your top stitch of the V and then the lower stitch. You want to pick up the lower stitch on both sides. And then you're going to go back and forth. So now we want to go down to the bottom and pick up the lower stitch of our next stitch on the bottom granny square, and then move over to the next stitch on our top granny square, again picking up the bottom stitch. So personally, I kind of like to hold them with the back sides together and then sew for me. Some people lay them down flat. I feel that's a little bit more difficult for me to sew. So I like holding it this way, but either way works. And then you're going to mattress stitch it all the way down. Again, you're inserting your needle into the middle of the V, picking up the lower stitch. Because again, we have the front sides facing up and the wrong side facing down. So I'm going to keep the video going, stitching back and forth, picking up the lower stitch. And again, we're doing the lower stitch because I have the right side or the outside of my project, what I want to be the outside, facing up towards me. The wrong sides or the back side of the project is facing down on the countertop. And I'll keep this video at real time for a little bit longer as I'm stitching back and forth. And since you can see the yarn, since I'm using this pink yarn, you can see, I think it kind of looks like when you're lacing up a bodice or a corset as you're doing the mattress stitch down the length of your granny squares. Okay, so I'm going to fast forward these in just a minute, and I'll meet you down at the end of the granny square. Now that we're to the end, I just have a few more stitches to do. And here's what it should look like. And now for the real satisfying part is you pull the end of your yarn to close the 2 granny squares together. And then that yarn that you use just kind of disappears. And here's how it will look as it comes together. So it looks seamless, put together. There's no big bulky seam to this as well, unlike the slip stitch version that I did. And it looks really nice. I really love doing the mattress stitch, and it's very quick as well. So the one thing you do want to notice is, since I used a different color yarn, if I kind of move or pull the 2 granny squares apart, you can see the yarn. So that's why it's best to use still the same color yarn for your project, even when doing a mattress stitch. Here's an example of a granny square purse I did. This is using the Starburst granny square pattern, and then I mattress stitched them all together using a single color yarn. And I do have this purse lined with a cotton fabric, but you can see that it can stretch apart those seams a little bit. And I have used this purse months at a time, and I've overloaded it with my wallet, keys, purse, makeup, whole bunch of stuff. And so you can get that little stretch into the seams where you stitch them together. So that's why it's good to use the same color yarn so you don't see that, unless that's the look you're going for where you want to maybe see a little bit of it. So I hope you enjoyed the 2 ways to join your granny squares together so you can make the same purse multiple times, but have a couple different looks for your purses or your cardigan or whatever you are making with your granny squares. So please like and follow for more, and thank you so much for watching. Happy crafting, everybody.